Well, the interesting thing is that in Europe, that Richard rightly points to, it's the nationalists who are saying, put our country first, and the nationalists are considered to be the right. Well, what's left and what's right about whether you're for your own country to take control of your destiny? The press and sort of the vocabulary that is being used to describe this process, both in Europe and the United States, has become meaningless between left and right. Although certainly the nationalist right in Europe agrees that yes, we should be independent so that we can make our wealthiest financial class even wealthier. That is the fight that is very explicitly broken out in France, when the new prime minister is a supporter of cutting back social spending and refusing to impose the 2% wealth tax on the wealthiest that the lower house of France wanted to impose. So when the only response to dependency on the United States, right, is to have a European right-wing response, you know that we're in a bizarro world that the old vocabulary of left and right had no way of anticipating logically.
Just for the record, it's called La France Insoumise, and it's an alliance of half a dozen of the left-wing parties who got together in France in a way that other countries still have to learn from, and presented a common front. And that left wing together is the largest block of votes in the National Assembly. So unlike other countries, the left is a big power. You will not hear about it in the American press because the bias here is grotesque. You either hear about Mr. Macron, who is now supported by barely 20% of the people in public polls, or you'll hear about the right wing, Le Pen and all of that. What you don't hear about is the larger political formation, which is on the left. And if you think that's an accident, well, you're not paying attention. Now, let me try to explain what Michael just ended up with. Why right-wingers are taking the lead in much of Europe, not all, not by a long shot, but in much of Europe. Why would it be the right wing? And by the way, when I answer that question for Europe, I'm going to be answering it for the United States too. When capitalism crashes, which let's remember, we have a downturn every 4 to 7 years on average. We've had that for 300 years. The NBER in Washington gives a record of all the ups and downs. Wherever capitalism goes, it's a fundamentally unstable system. If you lived with a person as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago, and you ought to think about that. Okay, so why? In the 1930s, when capitalism crashed, large numbers of it went to the left. For example, in the United States. What did millions of Americans do that was remarkable in the 1930s Great Depression? They joined a union for the first time in their lives. They joined 2 socialist and 1 communist party who all worked together to produce what's called the New Deal. Right? That is the most left-wing activity demonstrable in American history. Is it possible for the working class to go to the left when the system starts to break down like it did in the 30s? The answer is yes. And by the way, similar things happened in Europe. But after World War II, and in the last 75 years, we all know what the United States and Europe experienced. A Cold War, which had much less to do with the Soviet Union and much more to do with rolling back the New Deal in the United States and undoing the power of social democracy from Scandinavia in the north to Greece in the south. And that's what we've been doing for 75 years, hammering anti-socialism, anti-communism, all of that. So why are we surprised that now that capitalism is experiencing its latest and maybe its final decline, we have people, the working class, moving in large numbers to the right? They've been trained to do that for 75 years. The left has been demonized. What you're seeing now, the demonization of Mr. Putin, and I'm not here to support him one way or the other, But the demonization is childish. Why would you do that? Mr. Putin is now the same as Mr. Stalin. This is kind of silly. What are you doing? Because you're desperate, because that's the way you think, not just the leaders. The leaders in Europe couldn't get away with this childish demonization if there weren't in the population still the residues of 75 years of indoctrination. But here's the good news. The right wing has no solution for the collapse of capitalism. And the longer it flails around, the more that will become clear. That's what's happening in France. Of course, they're the first ones. They have been for the last 3 centuries. They're the canary in the coal mine, letting us know, uh-oh, what's coming? When the right wing is exposed as having no solution at all, then the people will move to the left. Watch out, because that's coming down the pike.
Richard, how can the working class move left without a political party? That's the problem. At least in Europe, the left could create a new party, as Sarah Wagenknecht has done in Germany. But America is only a 2-party system, as we've described. And you can see with a democratic socialist, Mr. Mondami, overwhelmingly getting support in his run for mayor of New York, supported by Bernie Sanders and AOC. The Democratic Party denounces that as being the left. And the Democrats say, we're not the left. Socialism is poison for us. And they've done everything they preferred to lose the 2016 election with Hillary instead of winning with Bernie, just because the Democratic Party is the great enemy of the left. So that's why the working class has moved to the Republicans, because they've given up, as I have certainly. Well, I never supported the Democrats to begin with, since I was always a socialist. But there's a perception among the workers and the middle class and the ruling class that the Democrats are the ultra-right, Cold War, neocon, neoliberal party.
I agree with you, but let me again play the same role. Over the last week, 2 polls emerged. One, the New York Times, the Siena College poll, and the other one, the Gallup poll. And here's what they show. And here I am borrowing, I should give credit where it's due, to an article in the American Prospect by one of its leading writers, Harold Meyerson. And in that article, it's all available right now, those polls show that a majority of Democrats want Bernie Sanders, want the left solution, want people like Zoran Mondani. And I want to also point that Bernie is beginning to see it too. He endorsed in Maine a very important candidate for the Senate to replace Susan Collins, who is a disaster. And the person is Platner is his name, Graham Platner. He's an oyster fisherman choosing not to run in the Democratic Party. So yes, Bernie endorsed Mondani, who is running in the Democrat, but he also endorsed Platner, who isn't running. And you're going to be seeing more and more. What we see here is what again happened in Germany. Sarah Wagenknecht is part of what was called before the Die Linke, which is the left-wing party. Linke in German means left. Die Linke is the left. That's the name they chose. And together they get more than 10% of the vote already, Wagenknecht and the Die Linke. But here's the origin of the Die Linke, a split away from the German Socialist Party, the one that is all the time, half the time in government, a rough equivalent of our Democratic Party. The left wing of that broke away and allied with the independent left, including what was left of the old Communist Party of East Germany. They formed the Die Linke, and they are now, throughout Germany, a left-wing alternative that holds seats in the regional parliament, etc., etc. So the notion that this all has to go in a right-wing direction is a mistake. We shouldn't be surprised that that's where it goes first. When this starts to unravel, this capitalist game, well, then the first reaction of frightened people is to go where they've been told you ought to be. When that fails too, then when we'll have our chance to present our idea. Look, in this country, if I stood up and I explained that rather than allowing the Tesla Corporation, which depends on the United States, to give $1 trillion to one man who is already the richest man on this planet, that we could better tax that trillion and use it to deal with the problems of this country. If I stood for election on that platform, I'd already win. And we're not even at the point where we can move. Michael is right. The left in Europe is better organized. But that's a problem we can solve because the support, the idea of what our political system ought to be relative to what it is, that's already for us. We now just have to organize and mobilize it. And that puts the left in a better position in the United States than it has been since the end of the Second World War.
I wish I could agree with you, but I'm so pessimistic about the rottenness of the Democratic Party and the fervor and hatred that it has for the working class, for socialism, for the hatred for Bernie Sanders, the hatred that it has for Mandami as an existential threat to its loyalty to Wall Street and the financial sector that are its candidates. You mentioned what if you were running as a candidate, but how can someone with your and my views or Bernie's views get nominated for presidency? You saw the corrupt theft of the 2016 Democratic nomination by Hillary. You've seen the right-wing press. I don't see how the scenario that you're describing can occur without dissolving the Democratic Party as it is legally constituted as an independent corporation run by its board of directors that have excluded anyone with a tinge of the left. So, of course, the Democrats poll supports what you and I and Bernie and the others support, but they have very little effect on who the candidates are going to be for Congress and the Senate and the actual political administrative system. And I think that's why there's sort of an intuitive sense for voters, such as, well, of course, we would like a Democratic Party that represents working class interests, but in order to do that, we have to replace the Democratic Party as it is now politically and legally structured. And the only way to do that is to just block it from winning altogether. Yes, there will be one, suppose there was one party, a Republican Party at all. Well, that was the dream of the founders of the Constitution. There shouldn't be sectarian, there should be one party. Well, at least then you would have a variety. You would have left-winger socialists running against Republicans, all in the same kind of primary that many people think technically would give more of a chance for a left-wing politician to make the laws and levy taxes and determine American foreign policy than they would have by a Democratic Party controlled by the neocons and the neoliberals. That's really the dilemma. I don't see a way out of this without replacing the Democratic Party as it's constituted. And that's why I supported Jill Stein for her run that was making these very points, including on our shows on Nima's discussion.
No, I understand your position. I know that many people feel that way. I would suggest that from my experience, the majority of the American working class that I interact with feels pretty much that way and is pessimistic about the situation. And I can't say I'm surprised. That my whole analysis makes it clear to me why, after 75 years of this, we have such a situation. Let me talk for a moment about it, very directly politically. I live in New York City. I'm sitting in New York City, as I believe Michael is as well, as we make this program. I'm watching a very modest socialist, a social democrat or democratic socialist, if you like, Zoran Mandani, running for mayor. Clearly, the front-running candidate gets polling always in the high 40%. He's running against an incumbent mayor whose level of corruption even exceeds what we're used to here in New York, and we're used to an awful lot of it. Most of his key associates are either in jail or on trial or being investigated. It's horrible. And he is busily making deals, secret and otherwise, with the president to welcome the ICE that the rest of the New York political system rejects, and so on. Right? That's one candidate against him. The other one is a former governor whose distinguishing characteristics are his sexual oppression of the women around him and behavior during the pandemic that endangered elderly people in nursing homes on a scale that makes your back away. These are his two candidates who are being flooded with money by the rich people of New York City, not all of them, but many of them, in their desperate hope not to be taxed to 1 or 2 or 3%, which is all Mr. Mondani has even said he would try. What a spectacle of absurdity this all is. So my answer to Michael is, we won't do it. The Democratic Party will do it to itself. The Democratic Party, as he correctly describes it, has a leadership that will literally push its own membership away. It'll become a junior party, the plaything of the donors who keep it alive, shrinking as a real political force on the left replaces it. The left doesn't need the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party needs the left. And that fundamental reality becomes truer with every passing day because of the declining American empire and the declining American capitalism. It can't solve its problem. You send ICE in to terrorize the scapegoat, and you offend so many other people by misarresting them, by hurting them, by obvious excess violence, that you're undoing your own effort. It's a little bit like what they just did with that battery plant in Georgia. What a very stupid thing to do. South Korean enterprises, who are among the most important they hoped to bring here, are saying, wait a minute. In addition to all the other risks we take, we run the risk that if we send over a team of people because we know our technology, you don't, poor Mr. Trump has to come limping along afterwards. Gee, we should have brought some over here to train our workers. Really, you think that? What an interesting idea. After you've smashed everything with your absurd ICE game. Sure, it's an internal army. Sure, it will be used to hold the people back. But it won't work. Those things don't do that. By the time you have to do what Mr. Trump is doing, you've waited too long and it is too late. And you're going to suffer all of the missteps, all of the mistakes. Instead of sitting down with the leadership of that company and talking about what their workers are or are not in the way of immigration and working out a reasonable plan, you did the theatric. But you always have to ask, why the excess theatric? Why the excess scapegoating? Because the situation is desperate. Desperate people do what you end up calling self-destructive behavior. We're living it.
I agree. I can't disagree with any of that. We're in the same. I don't know where all this is leading, or have any sense of the time frame being imminent.
Well, I can tell you, if we all watch, or at least I assume many of you watched, the videos of the last couple of weeks in which a boat, which is defined as a boat on which 11 people are present in this boat, and the boat is moving through the water, And then suddenly there's an explosion of light, and it is explained to us that these 11 people are now blown to smithereens. They are dead. And we don't know until 2 or 3 or 4 days later, and the information dribbles out. The boat is 1,000 miles away in the ocean. Therefore, it is not threatening the United States, at least not yet. It is somewhere in the area of Venezuela, but it is not clear, nor could it be, whether it is going to Venezuela or from Venezuela. The president and the vice president announced to us, with no evidence presented at all, that these are drug runners, that the boat is perhaps carrying drugs, and it has to do with Venezuela. And therefore, the United States has no obligation to arrest these people, to subject them to a trial in which they have the right to defend themselves and to receive a punishment if they are found guilty that is, in some sense, proportionate to whatever crime they might be. All of that is dispensed. And Trump and Vance become trial, judge, jury, and executioner all at once. And nobody, I take that back, relatively few people think that there's something wrong. You want evidence of desperation? That's it. And will there be significant numbers of people who go along with it? Yeah, those who are gone to the right out of their genuine suffering in the last 40 years of economic decline. But even those people are mumbling at the bar this evening about giving $1 trillion to Elon Musk to add to his already 400 billion. The level of obscenity here requires metaphors taking us back to the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, and little of them is left.
I want to say something about the attack on the boat. In the last 2 days, it's come out that it wasn't the Coast Guard that attacked the boat. Everybody said, well, wait a minute, a boat is supposed to approach the target and tell them to stand down, to ask what they're doing, to let themselves be boarded or whatever. The boat was shot down by drones. The U.S. apparently has drones simply flying throughout the ocean off of Venezuela to shoot down whatever moves. Now, talk about scapegoats. The drones had no reason to know to answer your question of was it going to Venezuela, away from Venezuela. Just the fact that it was there. The United States had to shoot down a boat. It doesn't have enough ships to go everywhere in the ocean, the Atlantic around that area. So it just used drones to find a boat so that Trump then could say, we've just prepared what will be the first step in a series of attacks on similar ships having anything to do with Venezuela or in international waters anywhere of it in. It was Senator Rand Paul, the Republican extremist in the Senate, that pointed out the fact that all of this was done without all of the legal niceties that you're supposed to do to follow the formalities of war. And this is what Trump says is there are no rules at all anymore. Don't you get it? The 1945, 2025 era of United Nations rules are gone. It is totally under U.S. rules, and this is what is it's more radical. It's something that spans the whole political spectrum from the left to the right. That's occurred. And I would imagine that other military discussions on Neema's programs will be elaborating that and how utterly radical it is.
Yeah, and again, we're repeating, For me, desperate. There's no need to do this. There is no need to do this. Those 11 people are 1,000 miles away. No American, and no one has asserted that any American was endangered by these people or threatened by these people. What are you doing? Why would you deliberately violate all those norms of international law, of the law of the ocean, of the presumption of innocence until proven guilty? All of those things what we're supposed to revere as Western values chucked out the window in order to kill 11 people and then wonder who they were and what they were doing. What? This is the act of it. I can see Mr. Trump, who I presume had to authorize this sort of thing, being in a bad mood and wanting, therefore, to deal with his frustration at being unable to stop the war in Iraq or stop the horror in Gaza or stop, can't do any of it. Can't avoid the recession, can't avoid the inflation, can't decide whether the tariff should be up or down or paused or not paused, or what to do about India now that you've pushed away the single most important foreign ally you could have acquired. I mean, the level of frustration is probably high, and this is this is an outcome. This is an impulsive act done by a desperate person who should have known better, who may even know better, but is caught up in a level of downturn and decline and frustration. That's what makes our times difficult. Not Mr. Putin and not Xi Jinping, but the problem that they are not here. They can't be other than extras in the story. Our story is about our economic system, our U.S. dominance in the world, and it's over. And it's terribly difficult for the American people to face it. And Mr. Trump rides on that difficulty. He rode into office on it, and he will exit office on it, and he will not solve it. And that will be the legacy that haunts him and the right wing that supports him for years to come. Mr. Lutnick is an example of a very self-satisfied American businessman who comes out of the last 75 years imagining that those 75 years have lasted and will last forever. And therein lies the catastrophic mistake that all of history teaches. The past is not the future. And if you extrapolate forward, you will make misjudgments that will destroy you. That's what he's doing.
The guiding illusion is that other countries need the American market, and they don't need it. The big market is in the BRICS and their allies. That is the illusion, along with the illusion that Russia and Iran is a military threat to Europe. You're dealing with illusions which have a kind of life of their own. The fact is that Russian oil is the key to energy production and energy use in India. And of course, India finds the reliance on Russian oil more economically important than the U.S. market. That's what the Americans can't understand. The rest of the world does not need the United States. So that's the question of why did the colonies agree to remain as part of the U.S. empire instead of joining the global majority? That's the big puzzle to be solved. And that's a geopolitical position that I think overshadows the whole issue of right and left.